The new inflation stats are out, and they are absolutely horrifying. The new inflation stats show that we are now at 8.5%. 8.5% is the highest since the late 70s, early 1980s. This is massive inflation. Now, the White House was warning yesterday this is exactly what was going to be announced. Here's Jen Psaki yesterday announcing this.
Because of the actions we've taken to address the Putin price hike, we are in a better place than we were last month. But we expect March CPI headline inflation to be extraordinarily elevated due to Putin's price hike. And we expect a large difference between core and headline inflation, reflecting the global disruptions in energy and food markets.
The numbers are astonishing. The food index increased 8.8%. That is the largest 12-month increase since the period ending May of 1981, when we were in the middle of Jimmy Carter's stagflation. That was the tail end of it before Paul Volcker ratcheted up the interest rates to like 18-20%. President Biden, by the way, is fighting back the oil prices. How's he doing so? He's going to announce that his administration will temporarily allow E15 gasoline, which is gasoline that uses a 15% ethanol blend, typically banned for sale, from June to September to be sold this summer. Wow, that's gonna fix the problem. Is ethanol. Ethanol is gonna fix the problem. Sure. Okay, this is a 1.2% increase in the inflation rate since last month's report. That is still the highest single increase since 2005. Hourly earnings are down 2.7%. Weekly earnings are down 6%. That renders essentially all wage gains absolutely meaningless. So just a disaster area of inflation under the Biden administration. None of that is particularly shocking. Well, the good news is we have Kamala Harris out there to explain how they are really interested in lowering Americans' monthly bills.
The president and I know that one of the biggest challenges facing working families today is the rising cost of living. Helping Americans lower their monthly bills is one of our administration's top priorities. And that is why we are here today.
Yeah, and you've been so good at it that you've ratcheted up America's living bills beyond the measure of the rational. Speaking of which, the people who are getting hurt the worst are the people who are on fixed incomes, of course. If you're on a fixed income, the new inflation stats are just wrecking you. Because after all, the amount of money that you're getting every month is exactly the same, but now everything costs a lot more. According to the Wall Street Journal, signs are mounting that high inflation is helping propel more people, including retirees, back into the labor force, according to economists. That could be good for the economy overall, as a growing workforce boosts the economy's growth prospects. It could ease staffing shortages that have pushed up wages and added to price pressures. But for many people, including those who rely on pensions or limited savings, rising prices are an unwelcome development, forcing them back onto the job market. Inflation is a tax on a couple of types of people. One, people with savings, and two, people of low income. That is where inflation really hurts people. According to Joseph Brusoulis, the chief economist at RSM US, quote, "We're beginning to see the migration of the older cohort who expected to live on fixed income in a low interest rate and low inflation environment. That has not materialized. Therefore, they have to come back to the labor force to create the conditions so they can retire." He said, really what you're dealing with is an inflationary shock that has elicited a change in this behavior. The share of people aged over 55, either working or looking for a job, rose to 39% in March from 38% in October. More than 480,000 people in that age group entered the labor force during the past 6 months. Now, this makes sense. Inflation is basically driving people back into the workforce. So all of the talk about how people were going to be quitting long-term from the economy, that was only true so long as Joe Biden could subsidize them, but he can't subsidize them, not to the tune of the inflation that he has now created. Roughly 2.6 million Americans retired earlier than expected between February 2020 and October 2021. Now, many are returning to work at rates not seen since March 2020. Again, people still need to pay their bills. And this is deeply connected with the stupidity of the Biden administration, which continues to pour money on raging gas fires of inflation. It's pretty incredible. I mean, Joe Biden's solution to this, by the way, is still to push Build Back Better. Meanwhile, one of the things that is exacerbating the ramp up, the lack of production, which is necessary in order to cut down on inflation, is continued talk about COVID mandates and COVID restrictions. This administration just can't let go. So Joe Biden's new COVID advisor, Ashish Jha, said yesterday, maybe we'll extend the airline mask mandates. On what basis? The airline mask mandates have never been useful, ever. Those HEPA filters in the planes are incredibly good. Planes were never a vector of transmission. And yet here is the Biden administration saying they want to mask up forever on planes. Again, it's this sort of stuff. This stuff does have an impact on how the economy works.
Does that mean that extending the mask mandate in public transportation is a live option? It's on the table?
Yeah, I look, this is a CDC decision, and I think it is absolutely on the table. And Dr. Walensky is going to make her decision based on the framework that the CDC scientists create, and we'll make a decision collectively based on that.
No, I don't think I think you'll make a decision based on what you think is politically valuable at the time. The good news about this White House is that even as they push things like masks for all of you peasants on the plains, people like Kamala Harris don't need to wear masks. This time, Kamala Harris was not wearing a mask indoors during an event for Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was just confirmed for her slot to the Supreme Court. Jen Psaki was asked about why it is that Kamala Harris doesn't have to mask up like the little people, and here was her answer.
You said on Friday that the vice president was masked indoors all day, but the White House tweeted a video showing her standing over the president without a mask on. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, I would say that the vice president and the president and all of us abide by what the CDC protocols are. It was an emotional day. It was a historic day. And there were moments when she was not wearing a mask inside, including in a photo. But she was wearing it 99.9% of the time.
And for those of you who are not peasants, if you have an emotional day, like say you had a parent dying in the hospital, or an emotional day, like say a wedding, an emotional day, a historic day, something that matters to you, it doesn't matter. You need to mask up forever. I mean, you're indoors, obviously. But Kamala Harris was having an emotional day. She was having a moment. She's having an emotional, feelings-driven moment. So she doesn't have to wear a mask. This is like London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, who's unmasked inside in a club, but the spirit moved her, so that was okay. It's amazing how when feelings move Democrats, they're allowed to take off the mask. And frankly, I think this should be all of our excuses. Every time we get on a plane from now on, we should all just say, listen, I'm having a historic day. It's an emotional day for me here on this plane. This is the first time I've ever been on this particular plane. It's very historic and emotional for me. I don't need to wear a mask anymore because after all, I learned from the Vice President of the United States that if I'm having a moment, here's my emotional support animal, my emotional support cheetah. I brought it with me. And here's my proof. I don't need to wear a mask. It's an emotional moment for all of us. And this means I no longer have to wear a mask. It's all just an issue of control for these folks. And those issues of control have serious bleed over effect for how the state is run. And that has bleed over effects for your kids going to school, has bleed over effects for the economy, and has bleed over effects even in terms of simple decisions about how you're going to live your life. So you've got the Biden administration, which is out there exacerbating COVID talk, COVID lockdown talk again, and more sorts of restrictions as we enter the summer. And meanwhile, the inflation stats are just out of control, completely out of control. And once again, I bring you Kamala Harris, who does not know what a Pell Grant is, explaining why we need to now have the government essentially waive student debt, which, by the way, increases inflation.
Have you increased Pell Grants?
We have definitely extended it's something that I think we need to keep doing, the awareness about what we have to do on Pell Grants, and I can follow up with you on specifically what we've been doing. But I can tell you that when I was in the Senate, I was definitely working on the Pell Grant issue because it can't be what it was when I was at Howard.
Okay, so the very edifying stuff there from the Vice President of the United States. Meanwhile, Philadelphia is announcing a new indoor mask mandate April 18th. It said, quote, the Philadelphia Department of Public Health established a benchmark system in February that uses case counts, hospitalizations, and the increase in case rates to determine which safety strategies are needed. This is according to Philadelphia Inquirer. The 7-day daily average of cases, 142 as of April 8th, and a 60% increase in case counts over the past 10 days met the standards to reintroduce the indoor mask mandate. The paper cited Health Commissioner Cheryl Bedegal saying the number of cases have prompted the move. Quote, if we fail to act now, knowing every previous wave of infections has been followed by a wave of hospitalizations and a wave of deaths, it'll be too late for many of our residents. They are reintroducing the indoor mask mandate in Philadelphia. Just genius stuff here happening from the Democrats. By the way, it is worth noting at this point that according to a new paper from Phil Kerpen, Stephen Moore, and Casey Mulligan, available at the National Bureau of Economic Research, it's a report card on states' response to COVID-19. And what they find is essentially that blue states completely blew it. So they measured which states did best. And they measured it using 3 categories: the economy, education, and mortality. So they looked at unemployment and GDP by state. And then they looked at the Burbio cumulative in-person instruction percentage for the 2020-2021 school year, right? So this is who kept their schools open. And then they looked at COVID-associated deaths reported to the CDC and all-cause excess mortality. And here is what they found. They found that the states that did the best were nearly all red states, and the states that did the worst were nearly all blue states. They said that on the basis of economics, the states that ended up doing the best and mortality rate, excess mortality, the states that did the best were states like Utah. Vermont did really well. Florida did really well. States like California did incredibly poorly. What they find is that there's no relationship between reduced economic activity during the pandemic and composite mortality measure. So lockdown economies did not actually have better health. There's no actual correlation. They also find that there is only moderate correlation between school closures and the mortality measure, but they don't believe that that relationship is causal. They did find a strong relationship between states that had poor economic performance and closed down schools. So here's what they concluded. Quote, 3 states stand out as having combined scores well above the others: Utah, Nebraska, and Vermont. They're substantially above average in all 3 categories. 6 more states followed, including Montana and South Dakota, almost 2 standard deviations above the average in terms of economy, but 0.8 to 1.0 below in terms of mortality, i.e. higher death rates. New Hampshire and Maine were about 1.5 standard deviations above average on mortality, while also somewhat above average economically. Although sometimes criticized as having policies that were, quote, too open, Florida proved to have average mortality while maintaining a high level of economic activity and 96% open schools. When we combined these 3 categories using Z-scores, future research could consider weights reflecting revealed preference, meaning like which things do people think matter the most. But they say that the 4 states with the most negative per capita rates of net migration from July 2020 to July 2021 were DC, New York, Illinois, and California, and all were in the bottom 6 in terms of composite score, in terms of economy, open schools, and all-cause mortality. So again, well done to the lockdown crew for, once again, breaking things beyond recognition. I know what you're thinking. It's time to binge some more Ben Shapiro videos. Well, you are right. You should. But first, like and subscribe. Perfect. I'll see you in the next video.